Hello, young fellows. Death is a step that we all go through, and it is intriguing to think about how we will die. According to the following story, sometimes the Grim Reaper can warn us when our end will come. Prepare yourself, dim the lights, and join me on this journey into the realm of terror. My name is Mark, and I assure you that what happened to my grandfather and everything I will tell you is true. And fortunately, I am still here. My grandfather had a strong character, and due to financial problems, we had to move to his house in a small town in Delaware. It was a large house with one floor and several rooms. My grandfather had his room, and there were several rules in the house. I had to be home at 9 o'clock for dinner, and every day, my grandfather at 11 at night, he made sure that all the doors were closed, and he always mentioned the most important rule to me. No one could go into his room, a room that held a mysterious aura, always locked, and only he could clean it. I knew he didn't like me completely. I never felt his love for me. But somehow we tolerated each other. One day when my parents went to work and my grandfather was away, I took the opportunity to satisfy my curiosity. I would have time. The old man had to run some errands. I knew where he hid the keys, so I took them and opened his room. I would never have imagined what I found inside. There were several shelves adorned with the figure of the Grim Reaper, a symbol of death and the afterlife. But it wasn't just one. There were several figures there, each one seemingly unique in its design and placement. One of them had several coins next to it as if it were an offering. Another, perhaps the largest, had black candles. There were paintings of people I didn't know, and I found a photo album with black pages that was snatched from me just before I opened it. It was my grandfather who had returned earlier and had surprised me, snooping through his things. I received a harsh punishment from my parents. They forbade me from going out during the afternoons when my parents worked, and I was burdened with additional housework. Despite this, my curiosity was not quelled. It only grew stronger, pushing me to see what was inside the album, which my grandfather was so adamant about keeping from me. Days before my punishment ended, while sweeping the long hallway of the house, I realized that my grandfather's room was open. My heart raced as I pretended to sweep a little outside, and that's when I saw him sitting on the couch in his room, with the album open. He realized I was there, and I walked away quickly, my mind filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. But he spoke to me immediately, his voice commanding, and I had no choice but to obey.
"Come here, Mark."
As I stepped into his room, I was immediately drawn to the figures of the Grim Reaper, their presence more palpable than ever before. My grandfather beckoned me closer, eager to share the family album. The pages were filled with frozen moments, people in various poses, some with their eyes gently shut, others staring directly into the camera. There were the aged, the youthful, and even the innocent, captured in their most candid moments. I asked why some of them were asleep, to which my grandfather assured me that it was not like that. They were dead. He told me that it used to be customary for people to take photos with their relatives who had already died. He showed me who his parents were and who his brothers were, all of whom were dead in the album. It was when he told me something that I would never have imagined. "I'm almost leaving, Mark. He came to visit me last night while I was sleeping." I didn't understand what he was telling me. However, I remembered that he once told me a story that made me afraid. If the Grim Reaper liked you or you owed him a favor, he would notify you 3 days before you died. If I hadn't entered my grandfather's room before, I would have laughed, but now that I saw sculptures of the Grim Reaper everywhere, I believed what he was telling me. I thought about telling my parents. However, I could already imagine how they would make fun of me and tell me it was a joke from my grandfather, who just wanted to annoy me. During the following days, my grandfather spent much time away from home. I knew he was taking care of his unfinished business. He returned only at night to eat dinner and sleep. I saw him tired. He coughed a lot every night. My parents worked late, and during those days, I was responsible for serving dinner to Grandpa. That's how, on the third day, we were left alone at home. We were sitting in the dining room while we were watching television. We were both having dinner, when he suddenly said to me, "I need you to go to the next-door neighbor and stay there with her," he told me. He started coughing. I told him I couldn't leave him alone, mainly because it was already late. However, he insisted. I saw him a little agitated, and the cough wouldn't let him rest. He asked me again to go to the neighbor next door and stay with her, and I refused once again. He coughed a couple of times, and his head tilted. I saw how my grandfather collapsed on the table. He had died. The day of my grandfather's funeral was draped in a somber, cloudy veil, as if the heavens themselves mourned his passing. Among the attendees were unfamiliar faces, friends of my grandfather I had never met. The words he had once shared with me about the Reaper's warning echoed in my mind. The days passed. I slept at a cousin's house during those days, and upon returning home, my grandfather's absence was noticeable. However, his rules persisted, from being home before 9 to not entering his room, which remained locked. I was alone at home. I was already getting used to it. It was almost time to go to bed, and I was having dinner when I heard some noises coming from the hallway. My heart raced with anticipation and fear of the unknown. I looked out the kitchen window, but I didn't see anything. I turned on the patio light to see better, but the result was the same. I returned to dinner, and just as I was about to sit down, I heard someone knocking on the door 3 times. I looked out again when I saw my grandfather's room open. I immediately thought that my mother had left the door open. Maybe she had gone in to clean it and left it unlocked. I thought about leaving it like that. But what the hell? My grandfather was no longer there. I could go in and snoop around quietly. Without turning off the light in the hallway, I went to my grandfather's room and pushed the door. The creaking of the hinges would have given me away, but fortunately I was alone. The room, untouched since his passing, held a mysterious allure, beckoning me to explore its secrets. When I turned on the lights, I realized nothing was left, just my grandfather's bed, clothes, and dusty books. I was disappointed. I'd expected to find everything I had seen before and be able to look at the photo album. But I found something, a figure of the Grim Reaper on a shelf. I grabbed a chair and climbed up to reach it. It had several coins, which was the beginning of a series of bad decisions, because I kept them all in my pocket. I tried to remove the figure from the shelf to check if I had left any, but it was stuck. I pulled hard, which caused the shelf to fall, destroying the figure. I felt my heart skip a beat. What would I say to my parents? Then a strong wind passed right next to me, making me fall from the chair and causing the door to close. Confused, I got up, shaking off the dust and the small pieces of the figure, opened the door, and left quickly, closing the door behind me. If my parents came back and saw that the figure had broken, they would think the shelf had fallen by itself. I went directly to my room, thinking about the money I had earned. I prepared for the next day, counted the money I had taken, and put it in my backpack. After a few minutes, I fell asleep. Later, a series of noises woke me up. I looked at my watch and saw that it was already 3 a.m. I could hear someone dragging something down the hallway outside my room. I imagined it was my father. Lately they had been arriving late at night, but he stopped as if he were doing something in each room. I heard him checking the lock at the entrance. He continued dragging something until he reached another room. There, he rechecked the lock. I could listen to him, ensuring it was closed when he got to my room. He got to my grandfather's room, and when he checked the door to see if it was closed, it opened. After that, I didn't hear anything. I thought it was one of my parents, and they had already found the mess I left in the room. I didn't pay any more attention to that, so I fell asleep. The following day at breakfast, my mother told me that she felt very sorry because they arrived late last night, saw that I was already asleep, and did not want to wake me up. I told them the noise they made when checking the doors had woken me up, but they both looked at each other strangely and told me that they had never done it before. That was something my grandfather used to do. Feeling a chill run down my spine, I made a conscious decision to ignore the unsettling situation, not wanting to invite fear into my thoughts. Little did I know, the night held a different plan for me. The rain was falling softly outside. As I sat down for dinner, the familiar sounds of the hallway echoed again, but this time they carried an eerie undertone, distinct from the usual. Reacting swiftly, I stepped out into the hallway. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed my grandfather's room, usually locked, was wide open. A sudden flash of lightning, followed by a blackout, added to the unsettling atmosphere. I could hear a series of footsteps coming close to me. My heart raced, and I held my breath, trying to pinpoint their origin. I was standing in the middle of the hallway when I saw the footprints of a pair of wet feet approaching me. I was petrified. Those footprints were getting closer. I was paralyzed with fear. They had stopped. In front of me, for several seconds, I stared at nothing. Those footprints passed me by and headed toward the dining room. I turned to see where they were going when behind me, an old man's voice echoed.
I told you not to get in.
I turned around quickly and saw nothing. I dashed towards my room, but I stopped short because I had to first pass in front of my grandfather's room, which was dark. I heard those footsteps approaching, so I gathered my courage and quickly passed in front of my grandfather's room to get to mine. I could feel how that darkness was pulling me in, but I managed to get to my room by closing it tightly and locking it. I wrapped myself in my blankets and started praying. While I was wrapped in the blankets, on the side of the wall that faced my grandfather's room, I heard a distinct thud. It was like something heavy was repeatedly hitting the wall, echoing through the silence of the night. It was already midnight, and my parents had not yet returned. I couldn't sleep. Then I heard someone checking the lock of my room. I slowly peeled the blanket from my face, my heart still racing. A hunched figure was checking the door, its presence sending shivers down my spine. But, seeing that the door was closed, it left. A few seconds later, the front door of the house creaked open, and the familiar voices of my parents filled the air, washing over me with a wave of relief. This calmed me down a lot. My father had keys to the rooms, so he opened my room. I pretended to be asleep, and he approached me and caressed my head. Then I fell asleep. The following day I decided to confess to my father that I had entered my grandfather's room and taken the money. However, when I opened the door to my room, I noticed that my grandfather's room was closed. My mother was going to my room to wake me up. When she saw me, she asked me how I was. I told her everything that had happened in my grandfather's room and that I felt sorry. I told her about what had happened the night before. My terrified mother told me, "Son, your father and I just arrived a couple of hours ago. We called you last night, but you didn't answer. We thought you were already asleep. Couldn't it have been a dream that your father caressed your head? I gulped saliva. At that moment I remembered what my grandfather had once told me about the Reaper and how he warned you that it was your time to die. Fortunately, 2 days have passed, and I am still here with you. I have had the misfortune of still seeing my grandfather. But now, as I walk to the side of the dining room, I see him sitting there watching me. I decided to wait for my parents outside the house. They scolded me, telling me that I should not be outside suffering from the inclement weather, but it is more the fear that I have when I am in that house, because I know that my grandfather is waiting for me.